Hello, and in this episode we're going to be looking at extension database setup. So this is designed to be done in two parts. As the first part, this is just to explain the different types of extension database you can set up, and mainly the different locations that you can have on your system. Because there's a second webinar that you're going to need to watch that explains how to do the individual fields. This is purely just where they can be located in your system. So what I mean by located, you can put extension database on a whole range of different things, but they are handled slightly differently. So the first thing you can do is put them on a different records. So for example, a client, a volunteer, or a staff record. You can put them on a tab, just as like a single field on a tab if you want to, or multiple fields on a single tab, or you can have multiple records on a tab, and we'll look at that. The second one that's most commonly used is the referral or contact-based extension database. You can also have single or multiple records on those referrals or contacts. And it's important we point out some of the pitfalls that you can come into with those kind of settings. And the third option is the clubs and clinics. You can also add extension database records to the club and clinics, both the attendances and the actual club and clinic itself. So if I go straight into my Charitylog system, good thing to check first of all is, can you copy from an existing extension database that's already set up on your system? So have we already done one for you in your implementation, and can you reverse engineer it just by looking at the way that operates and maybe change some of the settings? If you can't, you can go into your extension database settings in your menu at the top and click on extension database setup, and this is the page you get to. So the first one we're going to explain is the one that's on a client record. Okay. And I've got one already set up here, and we've called it client general details. It's a good idea when you set these up, if you give it a name of its location, because it makes it easier to find in the future, particularly if you have multiple extension databases. Calling it what it actually is makes it a lot easier to find. So on this first page, the settings page, the options I've selected is one record only. The next option I've selected is organisations and people, and I've selected which record type this wants to appear on. Okay. The placement I've asked for on a tab as opposed to the record footer, and I'll explain the difference. And the tab that I've selected is the personal details tab. I've made it available to all user groups, but you could decide to hide it from particular people. And then when you save and edit that, you get your fields. And the second webinar will explain all about the different types of fields and how to operate them. But what that actually looks like, if I go back into the overview, because I've selected it to be a single record on a specific place, if you can look at the settings again, one record only, organisations of people, on a client, on a tab, on the personal details tab. What that actually looks like in the real world is on a client record, on the personal details tab, single record, so I've got a single field there called hair colour, and I've got a single field there called client group. And those are the fields that I've added. Most common used function for this is when you want to extend the monitored information you have about your clients, and you need to add additional monitored information on your personal details tab. It's a good thing to remember to try and limit this to drop-down boxes or date fields. Try and limit the use of free text fields because they're very difficult to report on. And try and also strike a balance between what users are asking for and what is actually usable in the real world. So you do have to often compromise with staff if they're requesting for different fields and options on any of these tabs, really, to make sure that they are usable and they are fit for purpose. So that's on a specific tab. It could be on any of these tabs apart from the history page. You can't add them on there. You can't add them to the summary page, the projects, or the consent tab, or any of these functional tabs. So there's functional tabs are the things that do things. Things like personal details tabs or a new tab you set up from scratch, you can add as many as you like, but there are some tabs that you can't do that. Okay. So the second thing that you can do in the extension database is actually add them to a tab. So if I go back into the settings, if I look at one again that I've already set up, so if I look at the risk one, so this is slightly different than the previous one. So I've called it risk assessment. This time I've asked for one or more records. Okay, and this will allow me to add multiple. I've still said organisations and people, still selected client record, but this time the placement, instead of it being on a tab, I've asked for it to be on a tab below the form. Okay, and then I've told it to appear on the risk tab or the risk assessment tab. Okay, same settings apply, you get the same options for user groups, and then when you save and edit fields, you've still got your list of fields available on that tab. And what that looks like is if I go to the risk tab, instead of it being here like it was before, because I've asked for multiple, it's down at the bottom here. So I've had the risk assessment. I can now add a risk assessment based on multiple entries. So it'll allow me to add one today. I can add this. I can specify who did it. I can have a lookup of staff, and we'll all explain this in the second webinar. And I can put lots of information in here. These are all different types of boxes you can add. Save that. And then on that tab, not only will you have the custom information that you've added in one section, but you can have multiple extension databases down below on that tab. Okay. The third option you can have on a client record is at the foot of the record. Okay, and an example of that is in my client record. I've got these options here. These are record footers. You need to use these sparingly, really, because they can be quite easily hidden. If I'm working in a record and I don't see that at the bottom, you can see there above the save details, they can be hidden and they can be missed by staff. So we generally try and phase them out, and we try and move things over to a specific tab because it seems more intuitive for staff to work through the tabs up here. And if you have one, for example, called Satisfaction Survey, you might create a new tab called Surveys and Evaluation, maybe, and then load all your different types of surveys and evaluations and outcomes onto that tab so you can have them all available in one place. It keeps things a lot neater. But if you did decide there was a legitimate reason to go down to the bottom, on the settings, these are there above the Save Details button. When you click on them, they work exactly the same way as the other extension databases do. It's just in terms of where they are located. So when I go back to my settings page, if I go back to the Satisfaction Survey one, the only difference really on the setup page is I've set to one or more records, still organisations and people, still a client. This time on the placement, I've asked for it to be a record footer above the save buttons. Okay, same settings as before, all fine. Okay. The next way to do it is on a referral or contact, and an example of that is if I go back into my client record, if I refer them to one of my projects, you're going to see what I mean by this. I'm just going to select one of the projects that has one set up, and when I create my referral, in the record a contact screen, you'll see on the right hand side I've got an extension database. When I open that up, I've got different options. So it's a date field, I've got drop down lists, I've got single row, multi-row, things like that. And this is just me extending the information that is attached to this referral. Again, commonly used to extend the amount of monitoring information you're going to get from this original referral. So on there you could have different classifications for the referral, you could have different text boxes, different drop-down boxes. They tend to correlate with the monitoring information for that particular project, as opposed to the previous extension databases which are on a client record. These are on just that referral record only, so that's why they tend to associate with the project and monitoring requirements of the project. So the settings are very, very similar, but when you set one up, if I just go to how I've set that one up, down onto here, same as before, so it's the same screen. You give it a sensible name so that you're going to remember how to find it in the future. I would advise you do one record only, because it's a lot easier to correlate referrals when you've got a single entry record. This time, instead of organisations and people, you just select referrals. Then you will select the project that it's available on. Could select multiple projects using your control key if that's appropriate, but generally speaking, they only appear on one project at a time. And then this option here appears, and this is a relatively new function. I would recommend you switch on the on contact page above the save buttons, because that integrates everything with the same page. So that means on this page it all appears at the same time, rather than the user having it appearing after they press the save button, which feels a bit more disjointed. So where appropriate, I'd recommend that you select the save buttons. Everything else is exactly the same. The only time you'd ever allow multiple ones is potentially if this is an outcome or an impact measurement tool that's linked to the actual referral. You might decide to have more than one record, because therefore you'd have more than one impact measurement record on the referral. Just make monitoring a little bit different, because you obviously can't correlate an individual referral with a single individual result. So the compilation is slightly different. So the third and final thing to do with an extension database is to attach it to the club and clinic, or the club, clinic and group. So I'm going to look at one that's already set up. So down at the bottom, you can add it as a footer. So I've got a footer, and this could be used as a risk assessment for that group or additional information about that single group. So I can just add that, and again, like before, you've got dates and text and things like that. Alternatively, you could add an extension database to the actual attendance itself. So if I look at an attendance that's already happened, I've added an extension database to this attendance to say that I'm not just only capturing the standard information that that the clinic actually gets, but I'm also adding on additional text at the bottom or additional drop-down boxes for that individual session. This is a very useful tool to extend the capabilities of your Club & Clinic system. Difference before, very similar to what we had before. If we go back to the extension database setup, go to a new one, and this time you will see, same as before, one or single. If it's a single for attendances, make sure it's that. Footers can be one or more. Then you can select Club & Clinic, either the meetings, which then it appears on the attendance record, or the actual group itself. And you can then select which group it appears in. Again, you can select multiple. If you use the control key on your keyboard, you can select multiple ones. Then you can have this option. If it's going to be on meetings or attendances, I would probably recommend that you make sure it's on the attendance on the recording page. You don't really want to have people to go into different screens to record different things. So make sure you select that option. This is the same, and then when you save and edit, all the fields are exactly the same. So the key difference is really just to make sure it's one or more, or just one record only, and then either here, and that appears as a footer, or the second one, which is this one, the meetings, that integrates the attendance details into sections. So recommend you watch part 2 of this webinar, and that'll explain the different functions of the different fields. Thank you very much.